Galimjan, can you hear me? Hi.
Hi.
This is Nick here. Who's that?
Hello.
Hello, everybody.
It's me, Galimjan. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, that's great. So we'll start in 5 minutes, okay?
Okay, and listen, when I begin my presentation, that's the presentation there, yeah? Can you see that?
Yes, we can see and hear you.
Will you be able to see my face as well?
Yes. No. Your face will be at the bottom of the screen.
On the bottom right?
Yes.
Okay, fine. Well, I think I'm ready to go.
Okay, so wait a bit and we will start.
Okay. Karimjan, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Are we ready? I'm ready whenever you're ready.
Okay, so could you please turn off the screen, your desktop, and we will start. I mean, you have to see your face.
Yeah, how do I do that? Is that one?
Press the button on the top again.
1 second. Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay. Is that good?
No, not yet.
I can see my face here, but I can't see anybody else. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, I can see, but I can't see you.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi there. Okay, why can't you see me?
I think it's because when you put the presentation, we cannot see the video. It's fine. We usually make the same.
Are you okay just seeing the presentation without seeing me?
Actually, no, I'm here from my phone, so I can see the presentation and you as well.
So could you please help him to go back to his main screen?
But it's like to go back to the main screen, he has to take off the presentation, to close it first, and after to put the video, and after to put the presentation back.
Oh, yeah, that's great. That's fine.
Okay, so that's the presentation switched off. Do you want me to open it up again now?
Yeah.
Maybe when you start.
Thank you, Dana.
Of course.
So, dear students, hope you are doing well. So, dear Nick, thank you for joining us. Let me introduce you our head of the Department of Journalism, Gulnura Ashirbekova at Eurasian National University. Gulmira apay, are you here? Siz osundasınız mı Gulmira apay? Okay, our new speaker is Nick Fielding, with the topic named Journalism Old and New, Lessons from My Life in Newspapers. Nick will talk about the way journalists used to work in the pre-digital age and compare it to modern techniques. His point will be to say that we should not lose sight of the old journalism, as it can provide insights that are unobtainable any other way. So Nick Fielding is a British investigative journalist and writer. He's a former senior reporter on the Sunday Times and was chief investigative reporter on the Mail on Sunday. So let's start, Nick.
Well, good morning, everybody. Maybe good afternoon where you are, I'm not sure, but delighted to be here. And thank you very much for inviting me to take part in this event. I know these are very strange days, but it's a pleasure to be able to speak about journalism. I think there are lots of issues, old and new, and I want to try and give you an idea about some of the questions that have concerned me during the course of a life reporting as a journalist. I continue to work. I'm writing books now mostly, and quite a lot of books about the history of Kazakhstan as it happens. But my interest throughout my life has been in investigative reporting, and I worked in what we call Fleet Street, which is the name which we use to describe national newspapers. I worked in Fleet Street pretty much most of my life as a reporter. So I had quite a lot of experience, and I think I worked at a time when there were huge resources available to newspapers, where it was not uncommon to spend maybe half of my working life working abroad, traveling, covering stories abroad. It was not unusual to be sent out of the office on a Tuesday or a Wednesday and not return until Saturday or Sunday, or maybe even a week after that, not even knowing on the day where you were going, but just being told to go to the airport and catch a plane. So these were very exciting times. And I think that throughout my career, I've always tried to hold to that very important journalistic principle, in a sense, which is to ask yourself, why are we doing this? Why are we journalists? What are we doing in the course of our daily activity? For me, that answer was a very simple answer. It was that we were attempting to speak truth to power. It's as simple as that. And I think that that is what most journalism really boils down to. There's another expression which we use. We talk about the fourth estate. And the fourth estate is, in a sense, to make the point that journalism has a role in questioning the role of the state. And that's why it's called the fourth estate. We are there, in civil society, our job is to assess and to analyze and maybe even to criticize and maybe even to praise the actions of those who seek to govern us. It's a very important constituent element of democracy. And that probably explains why so many journalists around the world have a hard time, because people don't like these things being pointed out to them. So I want to give you just a few ideas of the kind of stories that I've worked on, and then to draw some conclusions about what I've learned through the course of my working life. I hope I'm speaking clearly enough to you, and I'm not speaking too fast. I've got a lot of material. I want to show you a lot of slides, and I will move through them quite quickly. But at the end, if you didn't understand something, please ask me, and I will return and come back to you. So now I'm going to switch to my slide display. 1 second. Can everybody see that full screen now?
Not yet.
Am I doing something wrong? What should I be doing?
So did you do the same?
1 second, I'm just going to do it now. There you go.
Okay. Oh, that's great. Uh-huh.
Are we there?
Yeah. Fantastic.
Okay, guys. Well, on the trail of the big scoop, journalism old and new, lessons from a life in journalism. I want to start with some of the kind of stories that I've worked on in the past. You see here a rather extraordinary photograph. These are two boys. And as you can see from the headline, these boys have problems. And this was a story I wrote for a newspaper, a magazine published with a newspaper. It was about a children's home in London, where the children really were out of control. And this is the story, The Lost Children of Grove Park. It's very unusual to get access to this kind of institution. It's a state institution, or run by local government. But the people running it were incompetent, maybe even corrupt. And the children who were in this school were using drugs, often involved in illegal activities, and so on. And I was able, through running this story, sorry, yeah, lost control there, 1 second. I was able, through this story, it led to a government inquiry, and this school was closed down. The regulations governing this kind of institution were changed dramatically. There was a lot of questions raised in our national parliament. And so, I would argue that this was a good example of the kind of school, a kind of story that journalists excel at. We're good at doing this kind of thing. We get access to institutions that other people can't get into. It took me maybe almost 6 months to write this story. I had to try and get access to people who had been in this institution, who were still there, and to try and find out precisely how it worked. And I think we were very successful in that. And it, as I said, led to positive things. I want to talk about an entirely different story. Here's a story I was involved in finding an animal. it may sound strange. Maybe to you in Kazakhstan it sounds strange, but here in Britain we have a very soft spot for certain kinds of animals, and I found out that a sea lion had been stolen from a zoo, and everybody was very upset about this, and they asked my newspaper to try and find it. And again, I mean, you'd be amazed. We spent months and months tracking down this animal, which had been taken from England to France. It had been sold to a circus and was being taken around the country in a giant show. You can see in the background of this photograph, requins vivants, that means live sharks. And they were transporting around the country these live sharks in big tanks, and they had this sea lion there. And eventually, I found him, and my editor asked me to buy him, and I bought him on the side of the road. I paid £12,000, and I brought him back to England. And he was taken to a zoo and spent the rest of his life in this zoo. There he is, safe at last. And you know, the extraordinary consequences to a story like this. We had one of the biggest reactions ever to from our readers. Thousands of them wrote to the newspaper. They donated money. There's me in earlier times with the sea lion. And somebody even wrote a book, Goodbye Ori, all about the book, about my efforts to free this poor little sea lion. So just here again to show you a different kind of story. It may be not threatening of life or anything like this, but sometimes things grab the people, grab the public, and they want action. And journalists can provide this action by finding out what has happened behind the scenes. And so that's precisely what happened in this case. I also spent time in a small island off the coast of England called the Isle of Wight, where some scientists had discovered the most complete dinosaur ever found in Britain. You can see the little diagram up at the top there, how enormous this creature was. It was maybe 20 meters, 30 meters long, and huge height, maybe 4, 5, 6 meters high, I don't know, enormous. And so I had the fantastic experience of spending 6 weeks with the scientists, with the archaeologists and so on, digging this creature out of the earth and recreating it. So again, another very, very different kind of story. It required a long time actually being with the people who were doing this excavation, understanding what they were doing, watching the techniques of how you recover something like this. I believe that Kazakhstan is a country which is full of wonderful fossils in the desert and so on. This was just to bring home to people what an amazing creature we had found under the ground. And I was also able to then write a story about dinosaur profiteers, people that illegally were digging up dinosaur bones and selling them in the market, selling them at special fairs where they sold these things. And so, you know, from one thing it led to another. First of all, the discovery and digging up, and then the scandal, how they were using these, some people were digging up these bones and selling them without any permission. So this was a very good story for us to get. Another incredible animal story. I was sent to Africa because we were told that some part, and this is in Zimbabwe, we were told that there were too many elephants in southern Zimbabwe and that people were trying to move them, and they had developed an incredible technique for moving these elephants in that they shot them with a hypodermic syringe with anesthetic, and they shot them in groups of maybe 12 or 15 family groups. And then when they were completely sort of knocked out by the anesthetic, they loaded them onto lorries and then transported them 300 kilometers to a different part of the country, and then released them back into the wild. Now, okay, I mean, it was one thing to get the permission to go on a story like this, but the real thing is that I had to come up with something very extraordinary in order to interest my news editor. And I said to him, I can promise you an incredible photograph, a really incredible photograph. And he said, okay, if you can deliver this, I'm not going to tell you yet what the photograph was, you'll see in a minute. But I just want to give you an idea of what this involved. Here we have Clem Kutsi, who was he'd formerly been an elephant hunter. In fact, he'd shot dead 5,000 elephants in his life, but he turned to do a different kind of thing to save the lives of elephants. And so he organized this scheme of shooting these helicopters. He went up in shooting these elephants from helicopters. Here you see him in a small helicopter with a rifle, and they would go up, spot the elephants, shoot them, and then they would take the vehicles into the bush to get them. Here you see one of the elephants, completely, he's not dead, he's just asleep. And here's the teams fixing all the ropes and everything so they can load them onto the lorries. There you see it. I'm seeing incredible stuff, but this wasn't the picture they wanted. I was able to persuade the Air Force of Zimbabwe to become involved in this project, and they agreed to send a helicopter, a big military helicopter, right down into the bush, a very distant part of the country. And here you see Clem again with another elephant, and they said that they would be able to pick up one of these elephants underneath the helicopter, and instead of putting them onto the trucks, we could take them out using the helicopters. It sounded ridiculous. It sounded impossible. How could they do this? But they assured us that they would be able to do it. So here you see the elephants being loaded onto pieces of matting, ready to be taken into the truck, which you can see behind. And there you are on the truck, ready to be transported. That's me on the left, and there are the trucks with the elephants just ready to go. And there's the Air Force helicopter, which they brought in specially to do this job. Here's the crew and the elephant completely loaded up. And then there's the rest of the crew. Everybody involved in this operation is a big team, as you see. And then this is the picture we got, the most incredible picture. And this is why they sent me to Africa, to get this picture. If I didn't get that picture, they didn't want me to come home. So that's what we did. And I'm very proud of doing that. It was an absolutely amazing operation to do it, and never been done before. So it was a first. And there you can see the elephant there underneath the helicopter being taken towards the lorries so they can be loaded onto the lorries and taken to a different part of the country. Huge operation. And I didn't realize when I left the country just maybe a week before that this is what I was going to be doing in Africa, but that's what I ended up doing. And there you see the elephants being released at the end of the operation, which was fantastic. And that's how it appeared in the newspaper: airlift from the place of the skull, how 1,000 elephants will live to see Africa's new dream. The incredible journey that is halting official mass slaughter of Zimbabwe's game parks. So yeah, I'm very, very proud of this, because before this they were shooting them, and now they were saving their lives by moving them. There's another funny, strange part of this story. You see the guy on the right here. He was a guy I was working with on this story. Some years later, completely unassociated with this story, I saw his name in some documents I was looking at connected to what was happening in Iraq, the Iraq war between the Western Allies and Saddam Hussein. And there were allegations about this guy. I mean, I had not seen him for many years, and suddenly I saw his name again. And incredibly, I found out that there you see him there, one of our pictures from Africa, from Zimbabwe, but below you see that he was involved in British firms faced fraud allegations over phantom armored vehicles. And he was selling completely fictitious armored vehicles to the Americans in Baghdad. In other words, there was some kind of corruption. Somebody was providing millions of dollars to provide trucks, but the trucks were not arriving and they were keeping all the money. And this guy, Haslam Bak, was one of those people. So isn't it incredible? 1 minute I'm working with him on a big operation in Zimbabwe. A few years later, he's involved in a major fraud operation. And we ran that story in the Guardian, and it had a big reaction. I also covered a lot of stories connected to the war on terrorism. And this is a story I wrote for the Sunday Times about a man called Omar Sheikh. And Omar Sheikh, I think, was a very important figure within Al-Qaeda. He was of Pakistan origin. And some people say that he was being groomed to become the successor to Saddam Hussein, to Osama bin Laden. And he was a very unusual person. He came from a very wealthy family. He had been educated at the London School of Economics. He was an extremely clever man. He was a brilliant chess player. He was a very dangerous individual. He kidnapped a number of people, both in India and in Pakistan. And in the end, he was responsible for the murder of an American journalist called Daniel Pearl. It was a very, very tragic murder. Pearl was kidnapped just after 9/11 in northern Pakistan. He was held hostage, and sadly, when the Americans refused to pay a ransom, he was murdered, and this is the guy that did it. And I got the inside story. I was in Islamabad at the time. I had just been in Afghanistan after the fall of the Taliban, and while I was in Pakistan, I realized that this story was important, and I was given the opportunity by my newspaper, the Sunday Times, to work on it. So I was able to say there was a British finger on the trigger, and you see the gun there. That was a British hand holding that gun that killed Daniel Pearl. Very extraordinary story. And obviously, we continue this inside the mind of a fanatic. This is the inside story of this guy, how he operated, what he was doing, what he was planning, and so on. He was involved in various hijacking operations, prisoner kidnap, murder, so on, a whole number of things. Until I wrote this story, nobody knew about this. So the importance of actually finding new information, of going and interviewing people, of seeking further information about him is emphasized very strongly. And as a result of that, I was able to write this book, Masterminds of Terror, The Truth Behind the Most Devastating Terrorist Attack the World Has Ever Seen, which I wrote with Yosri Fouda, who's a journalist from Al Jazeera. We wrote this story, this book, about how 9/11 was planned. And we went into great detail, showing precisely how the pilots of the aircraft which flew into the towers in New York, how they were trained, which schools they went to learn how to fly, etc., etc. We got the whole story in great detail and published it as an inside story, Masterminds of Terror. This is another story connected to Iraq. I was given some documents. These are in Arabic, I'm sure you realize that, and these are official documents connected to the regime of Saddam Hussein. And you may remember, Saddam Hussein had two sons. One of them was called Uday. And they were both well known at the time. I don't know how much you know about these things, but they were known for their extravagance, for their very kind of rich lifestyles, and also for their cruelty. And then after Saddam Hussein was killed, and after the regime collapsed in Iraq, a man came forward to say that he had been the double of Uday Hussein. He had actually been the double, and he'd done all sorts of incredible things. He sold. I was very suspicious because one of these documents, this document in front of you now, in Arabic, was saying that there's this man pretending to be Uday, and we don't know anything about him, and he's clearly a criminal. So I had, just on the face of it, I had a document which showed that this guy was not telling the full story. I also received documents which showed the expenditure of Uday Hussein, and this is the translation. It's showing the things that Uday was buying. This is Uday Hussein, the son of Saddam Hussein. And we have here, for example, lists of Rolls-Royce cars. If you look on the first page at the bottom, as per your instructions, hereunder is an inventory of the Rolls-Royce cars. And there you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way down to 18 very expensive Rolls-Royce and of the highest quality vehicles. These vehicles would cost $200,000, $300,000 each. And then below that, you see a handwritten list of Uday's, in Uday's letterhead, gold rings, all sorts of different gold which he was buying, all sorts of different vehicles, more vehicles, and another total there, 10 cars, another 6 cars, and so on. So I was able to show the extravagance and the corruption of the sons of Saddam Hussein. And there we see the Sunday Times. Uday was Rolls's best customer. In other words, he was buying more Rolls-Royce cars than anybody else in the world. And this is the son of Saddam Hussein. So it's a brilliant story. I mentioned the double. In other words, somebody who was pretending to be Uday Hussein. And he said this so that he could write a book, and eventually there was a story. And this guy was called Latif Yahya. And as I said, he claimed he was tortured and given plastic surgery, etc., etc. And my story was really to expose him and show that he was telling lies and that this was completely untrue. Here's his book, The Devil's Double, by Latif Yahya, the first installment in the true life story of the man forced to be the double for Saddam Hussein's eldest son. This was completely untrue. It was just lies. The whole story was lies, but he was a very clever, what we call a con man, a confidence trickster, somebody who could try and convince you of a story that was untrue. And it was my story that exposed him. This is another story I worked on. It's about the telephone that Osama bin Laden was using. And I was, after 9/11, I was going through some of the documents in a court case in New York. And I realized that one of the documents was a list of phone numbers which had been called by a sat phone which had been in the possession of Osama bin Laden. No one had looked at this. It was just there in all the court papers. So I decided that it was worthwhile analyzing to find out who had Osama bin Laden been calling. And therefore, you see my writing at the bottom there, UK numbers called. I wrote down the numbers, all the numbers from the list that Osama had been calling. And there you see I marked them all out in different colors for different countries. And the ones in orange are the UK numbers. And then I was able to get those analyzed, and I was able to work out precisely who he had called in the UK. Nobody had done this before. No police, no intelligence officers, nobody had done this. It was the first time anybody had looked. And you can see on the left-hand side there all the dates of the phone calls, 3/2/98, 3/5/98, etc., etc., and all the timings. And the call number, that's the satellite phone number, 682-505-331. That was Osama bin Laden's phone number in Afghanistan. And the numbers on the right there in colors, those are the numbers he was calling. And here you see my analysis sheet. I've written down the number on the left and then the address connected to the number. And then I've tried to find out who was living in these various different addresses. And this was a lot of work, as you can imagine, to try and work this all out. We then obviously had to go to these houses to knock on the door and find out, can you tell us please why Mr. Osama bin Laden has been calling you? And it resulted in this story. Bin Laden called the UK 260 times. And there on the left-hand side is a picture of one of the phone boxes. He used to call a phone box, a public phone box. And of course, one of his associates in the UK would be at the phone box at a particular time and would pick up the phone, and he would be speaking on the satellite phone to Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan. And that's how messages were passed between London and the UK. And it was me that discovered this. I also did work, this is a company, you may know this company, a European company called CNA. CNA were involved in producing clothing, and they had a big operation. What I found out was that most of their clothing was produced in, well, in particular in India. And I was told that they were producing their clothing by using children to make the clothing. So I was sent to India, and as you can see, this is my card, Mr. Nicholas Fielding, buyer agent from the River Clothing Company. So I went to India as a buyer for a clothing company. This was my disguise, if you like. I didn't disguise my name, but I had a different profession. And we gave an address there, and these telephone numbers, the telephone number was a phone number in my office in the Mail on Sunday, and the people next to it were told that when they answered it, they had to say that this was the River Clothing Company, just in case anybody asked for it. So I also had to learn some of the techniques used by clothing buyers when they go to a country to buy shirts or jackets or whatever. You need to be able to speak in a particular way. You need to know about the weight of textiles. You need to know about shipping. You know, what does FOB mean? Freight on board. What does that mean? And, you know, I had to learn all this stuff so that when I spoke with the factories making it, they would trust me. Because if they realized, and they did actually, eventually they realized that I wasn't genuine, and we had to run. We had to really run very fast to get out of the place because we were in danger. These people were not very happy that we were there. But we were able then to run this story for 40 pence. That's about $half. This girl works 13 hours a day making C&A clothes, and shoppers in Britain spend millions buying them. By Nick Fielding in Tirupur, with the photographs by Steve Bent. So that's how we got this story, by pretending to be a clothing agent, buying directly from the factory so that we could sell in the UK. And then I said to them, show me all your facilities, show me your factories where you produce these goods. And as we were going around, we could see that some of the workers in the factory were just children. They were just 12 years old. And we were able secretly to photograph them and then to run this story. And it had a huge impact. We had thousands of people writing in. They decided to stop buying the clothes of C&A. And eventually, this company closed down all its shops in the UK. There you go. C&A cancels £5 million a year in child labour row. And there was so much criticism. Suppliers should have known about third world sweatshops. And we called their factories barbaric. These are the factories that I was able to get into. Both in India and in Bangladesh. We did the same in Bangladesh with Levi's, making jeans. Levi's were making jeans using children. And again, we were able to do the same thing. It was not difficult. But it meant that we went to the country, we had to adopt a disguise, and we were able then to get this kind of information. This is, again, a very different kind of story. This relates to a machine. You can see on the right-hand side there, an Enigma machine. This is a coding machine used by the Germans during the Second World War. Very, very incredible machine. There's only a few of these in the world, and this one was stolen from a museum in London. Not in London, but just outside London. And it was a very bizarre story, and it led to, here's the machine itself. You can see the Enigma machine. You type the message on the top there, but the output is completely different. And there are so many variations because of it contains some rotors inside it. The mechanics of this make it very, very difficult to crack the code. Eventually, they invented computers in England in the Second World War. This is how computers were invented, to try and solve the problem of this machine. So it was very valuable to our history, and yet it was stolen, and I was asked to try and find out more about it. I received a letter from the thief who wrote to me to tell me that he had it, but that he wanted to return it, but he wanted a reward of £25,000. You can see in the paragraph, it says, in the second paragraph, this letter is to tell you the negotiations are in their final stages for the payment to be made of £25,000 as required by the innocent buyer, etc. So eventually, I was able to make contact with this guy, and at the bottom he said, can you see the letter? It says, should you wish to learn of what I am assured is the true story, then make your interest known via the personal columns of the Times. So what he was saying is, leave a message for me in the personal columns of the Times. And this is the personal column. You maybe see these, I don't know if you have this personal column in your newspapers in Kazakhstan, but look under announcements. And then you can see there's a strange message. It says, go to meeting point. I am sure that if you click with Alice, you will get the message. I'm happy to keep talking, Nick. And that was me. And I left this message. I paid for this message to be put in the newspaper. He read it, and then and this is how we communicated through these, so that he could read my messages without contacting me. But eventually, he became careless. Here's another message. Can you see the Times of the 30th of October? And underneath it says, "Delighted with your message. Please contact Nick." So we kept this story going. And there were some hiccups. I won't go into that now. But the idea, I had to make him look at this document on the internet. And you can see on the second page at the top, it says meeting point. And underneath it says Fletcher Alice. Now, this was set up in a special way. So that if you put your cursor over Fletcher Alice, it would connect to a secret page with some instructions. And this is how we were communicating with this guy. And that's what it showed on the page. It showed that he could call on this particular phone number, or he could send a message on a particular number. Eventually he did it, and he made a mistake because he left a clue as to where he was, and I was able to inform the police where he was. And as he was speaking to me, they arrested him. I was on the telephone to him when he was actually arrested. And there we have the story, how we cracked the riddle of the missing Enigma machine. This was an extremely complex, detailed investigation that required all sorts of different skills. Liaising with the museum, liaising with the police, dealing with the thief, having a special phone line set up, etc., etc. Very, very complex, but it resulted in a fantastic result. And this is the man who stole the machine, Dennis Yates, an antique dealer, and he went to prison. There we have him arriving at court for sentencing. He'd asked for £25,000 for the machine, but he was trapped while he was on the phone to me. So from my standpoint, this is a fantastic success. And I had a letter from the chairman of the Bletchley Park Trust, the museum, saying, he had been told of the highly significant role played by Nick Fielding with the support of Richard Caseby, his managing editor. And it says here, your newspaper has done the nation a great service. So I'm very, very proud of that. This is something I'm very, very proud of. We were able to get the machine back into the museum without it being lost. And somebody even wrote a book about it. Christine Large, the director of the museum, wrote a book called Hijacking Enigma, The Insider's Tale, which is the story of how I got this machine back. So it resulted in a book, and I didn't even have to write the book. This is another story I wrote. I was sent to Cambodia because some English young people had disappeared. They had been living in Cambodia. It was in the 90s. At a time when the Khmer Rouge was still operating in the country, and sadly they had been kidnapped by the Khmer Rouge. And I agreed to take the parents to Cambodia, and we did the most incredible thing. I mean, it was a very, very tough assignment because we went to the village near where these children, where these young people had disappeared, and we made an appeal. We asked the mothers to speak, and they spoke in front of all the villagers in this place and told them what had happened, and they begged for information. And incredibly, somebody came forward and said, we know what happened. And this is in the village. You can see all the villagers had gathered round, and you can see in the center there, you can see a woman with blonde hair and another woman. The villagers agreed to tell the mothers what had happened to their children. In fact, very sadly, they had been murdered almost immediately after they'd been kidnapped. And we were able, I wasn't personally, it would be too much, but they were taken to the place where their bodies were, the remains of the bodies were there, and they were able to locate them. Here's the meeting that actually took place in the village. This is a photograph of it. And this is the story I wrote afterwards. They loved life so much and now they're gone. And telling the story So it says here at the top, Nick Fielding on a mission to the heart of Cambodia that ended in tragedy for 3 families seeking their kidnapped children. It was a very, very tough story. Of course, when the families realized what had happened, they collapsed emotionally, and I had to look after them. So my job was not just a journalist, it was also kind of keeping them together until they could get home. It was a very, very tough assignment. This is another story I was sent to in Conakry in Guinea-Bissau in West Africa to work with some British hostages who'd been released. They had been kidnapped in Sierra Leone and they were released, and I was sent to meet them to try and get their story. And it was a very difficult story to get, because on the day we arrived, as we got to the arrivals, the hostages were just being taken out of departures at the same time. So I had to come to without even going into the country, I had to go from arrivals to departures and get on another plane. And it was, I don't know how we did it, but we did it. We finally got onto the plane. And here's the story. Britain's ordeal by monkey meat. That's telling you what they lived on, the hostages, when they were held by rebels in Sierra Leone. They were eating monkey meat. And the incredible thing is that when I was on the plane with them, flying back to England, the people who were protecting them, the police, and they wouldn't let us speak to them. So fortunately, we were able to get into the seats just behind them, and we were able to photograph them. And when they got off the plane at the end, we were also able to photograph them and run the story. This is a story I wrote about a man who was a migrant to the UK, but just very shortly after he came to Britain, he bought a lottery ticket and he won £17.8 million. Now, that's a lot of money, £17.8 million. He was just a poor village man who had come from India. So my newspaper, the Mail on Sunday, sent me to India, to the village where he was born, which, as you can see from the photographs, there were no cars, people were very, very poor. And I told them in this village that their cousin in England had just won nearly £18 million. And my job really was to record the reaction from the people in the village. It was an amazing story. And it's one of those things where I flew to India on the Friday night. I traveled all through the night on Friday by a vehicle. I got to the village, which was near, well, it was a long way from Mumbai, maybe 8 hours by vehicle. We did the interview. We got back to Mumbai on Saturday evening. I filed my story to my newspaper. I got on the plane at midnight on Saturday, and I arrived back on Sunday morning without having had any sleep at all from Friday, no sleep. And when I arrived at the newspaper, my story was the front page and the inside of my newspaper. And so I spent, less than 2 days in India on this story, flying there and flying back. It was an incredibly stressful job, but what a brilliant job we did. This is a story I wrote about a government minister who gave a present to a criminal. And so this resulted in a scandal, because why was he giving presents to a criminal? And eventually this minister, Michael Mates, had to resign. He was forced to resign. So I got rid of a government minister. There you go, Mates is set to go. In other words, the minister is about to resign. And in fact, he did a few days later. This is a story I wrote about our security service. And a member of the security service came forward and told me that he had some information about what was happening. And he said he thought it was a scandal. We decided to work on the story. But when we were working on it, the government ordered the newspaper to be prevented from running the story. So we said gagged. Gagged means to stop you speaking. Gagged. Tragic day for press freedom, as the government halts our MI5 revelations. In other words, they stopped us from telling this story. Not for long, but they stopped us. And you can see it says in the middle of the thing in blue, halfway down, it says censored, pages 7, 8, 9, opinion, page 32. So we had pages and pages inside this newspaper about the government preventing us from telling the truth. And there you go, again, censored by government action, fault line, secrecy leads to arrogance in government and defective policy decisions. So this was a huge scandal in the UK. And here we have the government threatening the newspaper. Tell me what the Mail on Sunday is going to publish, or the heavies will move in. In other words, you know, sort of the police will stop you. And this is what the Prime Minister's press secretary said to our editor, Jonathan Hobra. So it got into a bigger and a bigger scandal. Eventually, we were able to publish part of this story. And this is me. I had hair in those days, as you can see. This is me with the intelligence officer on the right-hand side and his partner, Annie Machon, who was on the left-hand side. She was also an intelligence officer. And this is them when they were hiding in France. They eventually left the country and hid in France. And I was visiting them at the time. And the strange thing about this story is it didn't just stop with the revelations. It turned into an even more strange story. Yes, this is very shocking. This is the same guy who seems to have gone slightly mad in the meantime and adopted this persona of a bizarre woman. Also began to declare that he was the Messiah. It's hard to believe, but this is what happened in this story. His girlfriend, Annie Machon, she became a kind of she now regularly appears on Russian TV, giving the line of the Russians. So what a strange thing for a British intelligence officer to be doing. And that also resulted in a book. I'm sorry about the poor quality of the picture, but that is my book, Defending the Realm, Inside MI5 and the War on Terror. And so this is the story of this intelligence officer and the background to the story and what was happening. On occasion, this is not my plane, by the way, but I was asked on one occasion to go to Sardinia. And I called our travel company and I said to them, I'm terribly sorry, but all the plane tickets are booked. And they said, well, hire a plane. So I hired a Learjet. And this is me in a Learjet on my own with a photographer flying to Sardinia for a story. It's hard to believe that this cost thousands of pounds. I don't know how much it costs, but they just said, get a plane. Doesn't matter how much it costs, just get on a plane and go to Sardinia. This is a story about a anybody who had a scandal story would go to Max Clifford and he would then sell the paper to the stories to the newspapers. And he was a very corrupt man, and I was able to expose him. This is one of the first stories I did in Fleet Street. As you can see, I'm a very young-looking man in the background there. The man in the foreground is Konstantin Stepanovich Kuzakov. And Konstantin Stepanovich Kuzakov was the illegitimate son of Joseph Stalin. And the man in the middle is his son. And if you look at him, can you not see Stalin in his face? So this was, again, an amazing story. He told me his whole life story about how he had been born in Arkhangelsk, in the north of Russia, when Stalin was in exile. He'd been born in 1910, the year 1910, in near Arkhangelsk. And he told me his whole life. Eventually, he became a senior figure in Russian television. And Stalin never publicly acknowledged his existence, even though he was an alternate member of the committee, the Central Committee. So I've tried to give you, in as quick as possible, in just over half an hour, an idea of the kind of stories that I worked on. And the point I want to make to you, in a sense, is that all of these stories required what I would call, the way I would describe it is to say feet on the ground. In other words, you had to be there. You had to go somewhere you had to find somebody, you had to speak to somebody, and you had, you know, at this time in my life, I suppose I was very seldom in the office. Mostly I was traveling. I was being sent here, whatever. We had sat phones in those days. There were no mobile phones. This is not so long ago. It's not ancient history, but it was a very different working environment. So sometimes, especially, for example, if you were in the middle of the African bush, to get your story back was an extremely complex business. You had to drive maybe for 3 days. You had then to find a place where you could use a wire, you know, the photographers had to use wire machines, what they called wire machines, which was a way of scanning a photograph and then sending it down a telephone wire. But you didn't have modems or anything like this. You had to make a connection with a telephone wire, feed it into the back of this box. So we often in our hotel rooms, we would have to take the telephones to pieces and then rewire them into our wire machines so that we could send our stories and our photographs back to England. But the basic point is that all of these kind of stories depended not on research online, but on face-to-face investigation mostly. And what I want to say to you, and this is why I put this slide up for Bellingcat. Bellingcat now is a fantastically successful journalism organization. For example, Bellingcat last week identified the people who poisoned Alexander Navalny. I don't know if you saw this story. It was a big story around the world. And Bellingcat did it because they bought black market information in Russia. They bought information about airline flights. And they were able to demonstrate through analyzing the data that some people, the same group of people, had been on every flight taken by Navalny. And then they identified those people as being from the GRU. So they were able to show that there had been a group of people traveling. Every time Navalny moved by aircraft, they also moved. And then they worked out that these must have been the people who poisoned him. So a great piece of work, but what we have, in a sense, is a different kind of journalism. We have big data journalism. And these are the kind of stories that Bellingcat and most other investigative organizations are now working at. For example, here we are. How to track illegal funding campaigns via cryptocurrency. That's a big data story. An investigative guide to LinkedIn. That's a big data story. Lies, damn lies and statistics. Data. Locating the Netherlands' most wanted criminal by scrutinizing Instagram. Data. These are all data stories. The Bureau of Investigative Journalism. Look at the list of their investigations. And what we hear, if you look down, it says types of resources on these pages. Data evidence behind our investigations. How-to guides for using our data and developing the story. Code, our technical tools to interrogate or visualize data. Resource, investigation folder or additional documents. So you get the idea that most of the investigative journalism that is being done today is what I would call big data investigation or data scraping investigations. In other words, you are manipulating sets of data to look for things which are unusual or odd or out of the ordinary, whatever, something like that. And I'm not saying this is wrong. In fact, these are great techniques, fantastic techniques. We did not have access to these techniques in the past, but they are not the only kind of journalism. And I feel increasingly that this kind of journalism is the only journalism that is taking place. And part of the reason for that, of course, is that it is comparatively cheap. When I was working on a story for a newspaper, I may be working on a story for 3 months, and together with a photographer, maybe a second reporter, and then I would be having to take flights, stay in hotels, have meals. You know, the cost of a story, let's say conservatively, some of those stories cost $100,000, maybe $200,000, I don't know. With this kind of story, 4 people working in an office for a week without going anywhere can produce a big story. Maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, I don't know, but the cost comparison shows that this is a much cheaper form of journalism. Here you see, again, the Committee for Investigative Journalism, CIJ, the courses that they're running. We run scheduled training courses in a range of investigative skills, data-driven investigations, finding stories with data, investigating data with R, introduction to code for journalists, using FOI, Freedom of Information Act more effectively. Again, as you see, these are 3 of the main investigative journalism organizations in Britain and in the world. And all of them, their primary emphasis today is on data. And I would like to say to you, my message to you today is that those kind of stories and the kind of stories that I worked on are quite different, and that we need both of these techniques in our armory, so that we can use data stories where we need them, but also we need to actually be out there investigating, actually having people going to the place. It's no good relying on what somebody says happened. We need to see, we need to be trained. You know, the point about journalists, and I think why we have so much fake news now, the point about journalists is that we are trained to assess the value of information. We spend our lives weighing information. Is this right? Is it true? Etc., etc. We are generally good at deciding what is true and what is false. Of course, today, with social media, everybody in the world can write. And many people like to consider themselves to be writers or journalists.